Good morning, everyone, and good morning for those who are in person here, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for those who are many online. Thank you very much to attend this event. I'm very happy to welcome you for the launch of the international report of the ICCS 2022. So my name is Thierry Rocher. I'm Director for Evaluation at the DEP, which is the statistical department of the Ministry of Education in France, but today I'm standing here as the elected IEA chair of the association IEA. All right, and I want first to thank our host to welcome us in this beautiful venue here at the Dutch Ministry of Education in presence of the Minister Paul, and we will be very happy to hear from you afterwards. Thank you very much, Minister. Just a few words before we start, and to say that today we will have a tight agenda, let's say. We have a lot of presentation. We have the presentation of the results, of course. Then we will learn about the key takeaway. We will hear from the minister, as I said, and move into a short break. And afterwards, we will hear more about Dutch results and a fantastic publication, which is a teacher snippet. So you will have to stay tuned after the break for those who are online in 1 hour or so now. I just wanted to tell you that you will see a QR code on the screen which appears and here in the room as well. And then I encourage you to scan this QR code on your phone. It will enable you to ask some question in the Q&A chat, because we will, after the break, address your question with our speakers and panelists. Right, so let me briefly introduce ICCS 2022. ICCS is the largest international and only dedicated study of civic and citizenship education. ICCS 2022 collected high-quality data from more than 3,000 schools, more than 40,000 teachers, and 82 8th-grade students from 22 countries and 2 benchmarking entities. The third cycles of ICCS set out to address topics related to global citizenship, sustainable development, migration, changes to traditional political system, and the use of digital technologies for civic engagement, while also continuing to monitor changes over time using common measures across cycles. The ICCS 2022, as you will see, international report, contains 6 chapters and which are broadly related to research questions. And while the last chapter concludes the report with a more general discussion of the outcomes and the implications. So, this is a brief introduction. You will learn, of course, a lot more with our 2 next speakers I will introduce now. We will start first by Dr. Wolfram Schulz, who is the ICCS 2022 International Study Director, a long-standing member of the Technical Expert Group of the IEA. Is also a Principal Research Fellow at ACR, which is the Australian Council for Educational Research, and has been working at ACR since 2001. Dr. Schulz will present the ICCS 22 international results this morning, just after me. Then we will hear from Dirk Asted, who is the IEA Executive Director. We will hear from him about key takeaways from the ICCS 2022. As the Executive Director of IEA, Dirk Asted oversees operations, studies, and services, and drives the overall strategic vision of the association. He develops and maintains relationships with member countries, researchers, policymakers, and other key players. Dr. Asted also serves as co-editor-in-chief of the IERI IEA ETS Research Institute journal. So many thanks to our 2 speakers. So Wolfram, please, the floor is yours.
Merci bien, Thierry. Goedemorgen, and good morning, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here and talk about the results of the ICCS 22 cycle of this study. I will start with saying a few more words about the study. Thierry already pointed out some of the general features of this study. It's the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, and as we heard, the only one that actually cross-nationally measures how young people are prepared for civic and citizenship. It assesses students in their 8th school year. It's typical grade 8 in most countries. It marks the 3rd cycle of ICCS after data collection in 2009 and 2016. And it also the transition to digital assessment. So for the first time, it was computer-based in about 2/3 of the participating systems. We gather information about how young people are prepared for citizenship, and that concerns both learning outcomes, that is, civic knowledge, attitudes, and engagement, as well as context. So we gather also contextual data from students, from schools, and also from teachers, as well as at the system level. Every time we also define focus areas for each new cycle. We do measure a lot that is basically things that we want to assess in terms of the development over time. But this is, of course, a learning area which has where things that capture things that are changing. And so every time we discuss what is actually of our particular relevance at this particular time for the study. And so we, in cooperation with our experts and with the national centers, we are derived at 5 focus areas. One was environmental sustainability. It's probably no surprise. Climate change is something that is often discussed, as well as other environmental issues that are growing concerns. And an increasing importance that is actually also dedicated to this particular field in terms of how do we prepare young people to think about environmental issues. And then also, of course, digital technologies have a huge impact on how people inform themselves, how they may engage. And here also we wanted to recognize that this, what is the impact of digital technologies on civic and citizenship education, and all the aspects that are related to it, and how young people engage. We also wanted to know more about diversity. There is growing diversity in all kinds of ways. There's more immigration, of course, but there's also more recognition of the diversity of society. And how do schools and teachers address that? And what are students' perceptions related to diversity? Then we all know that long-standing political systems, many long-established democracies, have more and more instability. There's more volatility, more alienation of citizens from democratic processes. And so one of the interesting questions for us was to ask about what are the perceptions of young people. And last not least, there's, of course, increasing globalization, and this is also a bit related to both diversity and digital technologies. Allows actually you to engage also across borders much more than you could before. And so there's a recognition of the increased interconnectedness of societies, and global citizenship education has become one of the things that people are preoccupied with when they talk about education and how is that actually taken up in different countries. So country participation is a bit volatile in this learning area. It has a lot to do with also that, of course, in many education systems, educational policies have assigned different importance to this learning area. And so sometimes things happen like COVID-19 pandemic that affected all political developments. And so what we see is a little bit an in and out that we have seen in this study. And this map just basically shows you a little bit of the coverage. Just as another country, other studies, we have a relatively limited participation, for example, in the African or the Asian region. And unfortunately, in Latin America, we lost quite a few countries that were interested at the beginning, but then decided not to participate for different reasons. So most of the countries are concentrated in the European region. I think that has to be also acknowledged when you think about the results. The data collection was, as Thierry all pointed out, a collection of high-quality data. So we had all kinds of quality assurance measures in place, and in terms of observing how it was done in different countries, reviewing translations and so forth. At the end, more than 3,400 school principals, about 40,000 teachers, 82,000 students, and 22 countries and 2 benchmarking entities from Germany provided data for ICCS 22. And as I said, it was conducted in adherence to very well-established standards. We had different instruments. We had a test of civic knowledge, which included 55 items that we had used in the previous cycle to measure change over time. We had 11 item clusters. It's our kind of, usually it's about 11 test questions that are clustered in one. And 11 of these were included both on paper and on computer. And then for those where it was done on a computer, we also added 3 clusters with specifically designed computer-enhanced items, so that used a little bit the possibilities, the opportunities that computers provide in terms of measurement. Then, as in previous cycles, we've had questionnaire assessment of not only background, but also of attitudes and engagement, and I should highlight this is of particular relevance in our study. We also had teacher and school questionnaires, so for teachers teaching at the target grade, regardless of actually their subject area. And we had also questions for the school principals on aspects of school, of civic and citizenship education at the school, and all kinds of different things, for example, also including the climate, classroom climate and school climate. A specific feature of ICCS are regional questionnaires. In Europe, we had one questionnaire for which 18 countries and 2 benchmarking participants provided data, and which will be released as a European report in about 2 or 3 months. And we also had a Latin American student questionnaire, which unfortunately was only administered in Brazil and Colombia, because I already mentioned that we lost some countries that had a lot of interest at the beginning of the cycle. Both questionnaires are more directed at mostly at attitudes and beliefs and perceptions, a little bit also about school context. And then the national centers also provided us with information, because you have to always take into account and consider that there is a lot of diversity across national system in terms of how this learning area is organized and implemented, and also very often, and I'll say a few more words about that, it's not done in the same way in different countries. So I will come now to the key results from ICCS 22, and which are all in this international report that has now just been released. So, first of all, a few words about the context for civic and citizenship education. So, what we find, and not surprisingly, the large variations, of course, in all the context for this. So, we have different political systems, so presidential, parliamentary democracies, for example. We have in a few countries voting is compulsory. One should take that into account as well. But also, of course, the demographics, the human development, the economic strength varies quite a bit. And that, when we look at results, we should always take that into account. And we see that also in other studies, that there is a huge variation. So in 22 out of 24 participating systems, civic and citizenship education is integrated in all kinds of key subjects. So, for example, history, social sciences, and so forth. In 12 of these, it was also, in addition, taught as a separate subject. And in two systems, it's taught as only that's as a separate subject. So that already tells you there's quite a bit of diversity in the approaches that education system take to this area. That doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means we have historically different approaches to what it's done. And also it should also be mentioned, some also have a more cross-curricular approach to it. Sometimes you have projects and for the whole school that are related to that learning area. This is a huge variety. We also looked at participation of teachers in training courses during pre-service, in-service training, and what was interesting that most frequently this was reported now for responsible internet use, conflict resolution, but less for example, voting and elections. So that's one thing that caught our attention a bit. When we looked at civic knowledge, and I would also like to state that this is not the main thing for us to look at. It's not only civic knowledge. We would like to have this broader approach. How much student knows, there are all kinds of factors that play, and I already mentioned the differences in terms of also the sociodemographics and so forth, and that needs to be taken into account. So what we see here is that, first of all, we have some countries that have very high levels of civic knowledge. There's Taiwan, Sweden, and Poland, for example, and they were about 50 points above the ICCS average. And at the other end, we had also countries with relatively low levels of civic knowledge. So in 22, these were Cyprus, Bulgaria, and Colombia. But again, we have to take into account these countries are very different. And what is also important to know is, so on this graph, you see actually also distribution within countries. And it's quite large. And one of the things that we should always take into account, there's actually more variation within than across countries. In spite of this stark difference between countries, if you look even in countries that have relatively high performance, you see there are still substantial differences between students and definitely also schools. For 11 countries, we had 3 time points. So we had 2009, 2016, and 2022. We equated these data across the 3 cycles so that we had comparable scores. And what we find is that while, if you look at this red line, is the average of all these 11 countries. And ICCS 22 had already data from 2009 and 2016. And what we see, while we had a bit of an increase between 2009 and 2016, there was more of a decrease between 2016 and 22. This was not the case in all countries. If you look at these, there's not always that same pattern, but overall you can say there was that pattern. And if we look on average, so you see it here that between 2009 and 2016 it was about 17 points for these 11 countries. From 9 to 22, still 2 points, so a slight increase, but then there was generally a downturn between the last cycle and now. And of course, there are a lot of factors that might have played a role here. We know also from other large-scale assessments that the pandemic, for example, the disruption of the educational system may have played a role to a different extent across different countries. And when you look at each country and whether it's significant or not, we see we had 6 countries here where we had lower, between 16 and 22, we had 6 countries with significant decreases. 7 were basically, there are no significant changes, but there were no increases as we had seen in 2016 compared to 2009. We also always look at how do these measures relate to student background. And so one thing that always grabs our attention, of course, is gender. So female students usually, tend to have higher levels of knowledge, civic knowledge. Socioeconomic background, which is measured by parental occupation, parental education, and home literacy also consistently has quite strong effects, positive effects on the level of civic knowledge. And immigrant backgrounds tends in many countries, not in all countries, but in many countries, has also probably not surprisingly, rather a negative effect on civic knowledge. And related probably to that, these are just bivariate relationships, students who use a test language at home also tend to fare better. This is very similar to what we find also for other learning areas. Now, turning to civic engagement. Around 1/3 of students actually, when they are asked, are you interested in political and social issues, say, yeah, quite or very interested. That's not a lot, but maybe also keep in mind they're relatively young. And of course, the word politics is in it, and that might also elicit some certain responses. What we also found that this is higher when they say that parents are interested, they tend also to themselves express more interest. Also not, if you grow up in a household where this is discussed very often, you also tend to develop more interest. There are other aspects of student engagement that we looked at. And one was, of course, digital technologies. And what we found that when you ask now about more active forms of using digital media to do things, it's only few students who actually say that. The more active, the less they reported. It was certainly more frequent among those who had already developed interest, but this kind of more active engagement with digital technologies is not yet apparent. Maybe it will be, we don't know, but maybe it's also that generally, because generally we find they are not that active and also not that interested, if you ask them about political and social issues at least. The majority of students, however, thought that they could do things, like organizing a group of students fairly or very well. So that was actually also something. They were actually quite comfortable in there, most of them, to doing things like that. When we look at how they actually inform themselves, and we have now also 3 time points to look at, and what we find is watching TV news to inform yourself has lost a bit ground among that age group. It used to be 70 and on average across countries in 2009, and now it's gone down to 22. Reading the newspapers already had a kind of a decrease between 2009 and 2016, so basically only used to be around 40% in 2009, and now it's about every 5th student. Internet, and here we had the same question only in the last cycle, so that remained relatively stable. One interesting finding here is if you ask them about talking about political social issues, it has increased. And maybe there is something that's happening also with all the crises we have gone through, that is just more talk about it, which would be quite plausible. Then we have to think in this age group, there are limits to what students, young people can do. You can't stand as a candidate in an election, maybe in school, but not outside. They have not reached voting age and so forth. So what we're always interested in is to see what do they expect to do later? And that may change, of course. So 2/3 of students actually thought they would at least express their opinions with others, but fewer students were actually saying they would do it in a more active way, like organizing an online campaign. When you ask about their willingness to participate in illegal protest activities, only less than a quarter say we might consider that in the future. So, for example, blocking the traffic, spray painting, slogans somewhere. However, when you ask about environmental activities, so things to actively do by refusing to buy products that are harmful to the environment, really most students actually say they would do that. So that's something that we found very interesting. Around 3/4 expect to probably or certainly go out and vote in national or local elections. This is slightly fewer than we had in the last cycle. On the other hand, also, and that is much more in line with last cycle, both are actually in line with the last cycle. If you ask them about joining a party, joining a union as an adult or becoming active in a campaign, only few students say that they would consider that. So it's relatively few students who say, okay, I want to become politically active. And we also related that to civic knowledge. And what we find is that discussions with political and social issues is a bit of a positive. So we just distinguished the students with less knowledge from those with higher knowledge. And then we looked at what are the differences in the scale points, the scales that we had derived for each of these issues and aspects. So discussions was positively related to it. So was expected electoral participation and expected environmental protection activities. However, digital media participation, as well as expected active, so joining parties, joining political campaign, was actually negatively related. And this is not a new finding. We had found that already in the past cycles. And what's probably quite plausible is that to expect illegal activities is highly and consistently has a negative association with the level of civic knowledge. Turning to the civic attitudes, and first of all, thinking about the political system and democracy, 3/4 of students were in agreement that democracy is still the best form of government. But we also found that only a little more than half on average, and that's on average, so in each country that may look also a bit different, and we found quite considerable variation on that one, think that their political system actually works well. And there were also more than 2/3 said all those who sit for me in parliament are really forgetting the needs of the people who vote for them. So that was a very critical view of the elected representatives. Again, there was quite some, not unexpectedly, some variation across countries. So in some Scandinavian countries or the Netherlands, it was still relatively high and positive, but there were other countries where actually this was quite low. Also what we found, there was a bit of a decline in trust in different institutions. So we found that for courts of justice, for national government, for traditional media, and also for parliament and Congress. We also ask about political parties. That actually is even lower than that. And that's also a finding from previous cycles, so what may not come as a surprise. We had a national emergency in most countries. So we had the COVID-19 pandemic. And we asked students about what they thought about restricting the individual freedom in situations like that. And there was quite a variation in terms of what it was concerning. So, for example, most were okay with closing schools, finding people whose behavior might put others at risk, but then more intrusive things were not as well received by students of this age. For a long time, we have inquiring about students' views of equal rights and opportunities. Gender equality receives high levels of support across countries. It is not surprisingly stronger among female students, and that stayed the way that we found it in previous cycles, and also we found again some variations. So while everywhere most students are supportive, there's quite a bit of difference across different countries and cultures. Most students also endorse equal opportunities for immigrants. So, for example, also on average, 73 said, oh, immigration is beneficial for our country. We also had an optional question about equal rights and opportunities for all ethnic groups in a country. And again, we had some variation and no increases since 2016, but higher level of endorsement generally than 2009. So this hadn't increased more than between the first two cycles. We found also high levels of support for environmental protection and also high levels of concerns about climate change. And that had actually increased since the last cycle. So 90% of students are of the view that all of us need to contribute to the reduction of pollution. When since last cycle, we have asked about what are large threats to the world future. And so this time we could look at changes in that perception. So we found increases for pollution, for water shortages, for climate change. That's certainly not coming as a surprise. It was actually quite an increase in terms of those who think that that is a large threat to the world's future. Violent conflict, again, not surprising that there's more of a perception that this is a threat. And also global financial crisis. We have still economic downturns in many places. And of course, we have violent conflict in Europe again, and now also in the Middle East. Infectious diseases has actually gone down, but maybe that's a reflection of we've just come through that. And maybe there's now less concern. We also related that to civic knowledge, and we found, again, there's quite a bit of a positive relationship for most of things like endorsement, gender equality, immigrant rights, equal rights, also beliefs in globally oriented citizenship, endorsement of environmental protection, and concern about environmental threats. Interestingly, when you look at the views of satisfaction with the political system or critical views, we found that the more knowledgeable tended a bit more to be those with lower level of, those had critical views tended a little bit more with higher level of civic knowledge, while those who were satisfied did not necessarily have the higher levels of knowledge. But again, that varied quite a bit across countries. Now, a few words about the classroom and school context, which of course is an important feature. So we again found that most students reported that they had an open classroom climate, and this is actually, we found that also positively associated with civic knowledge, as in previous surveys. Mostly there were high levels of student participation in school elections, voting for class representatives. However, some education systems did not offer as many opportunities here. And more than half of the surveyed students reported that they had opportunities to learn about different topics such as environmental protection, evaluating a veracity of online information, which is important, citizens' rights and protections of these rights. Most students reported optional and remedial courses for students on topics related to things like diversity, while gender issue things were observed less frequently. However, on average, more than 80% of surveyed teachers actually saw diversity as an important resource for their teaching. Most schools also developed initiatives to help with topics like environmental sustainability, differential waste collection, waste recycling, energy saving, and teachers also reported high percentage of students participating in activities to raise awareness of cultural diversity, global issues, climate change, world poverty, or child labor. I'm coming now to a summary of the findings. When we look back at civic knowledge, this is substantial gaps still that persist between countries, but also within countries. And that certainly illustrates room for improvement. And what we also see is that those who actually know more are also those that are more open to diversity, more supportive of environmental action on environmental issues, and also those who are more likely to say, oh, well, I might go out and vote. And we had these increases in civic knowledge between 2009 and 16, but now we have seen decreases. And of course, there's a possible impact of the pandemic. But of course, there may be also other factors. And of course, we also know in different countries experienced different impacts of the COVID-19 and pandemic disruption on education. So that needs to be looked at more and in a detailed way for each individual country. Teachers and principals, when you ask them about the goals, it's interesting to see that they are very, they emphasize things like critical thinking, environment and safeguarding it and global issues. But for example, voting and election and institutions are not quite as often mentioned as the important aims of it. And this, of course, makes you think a little bit about our current situation in many countries where very surprising electoral results come, where people go to extremes and extremist options in terms of their voting patterns, and also are increasingly alienated from their democratic systems and the democratic process. So that certainly needs to be looked at. What we also would like to highlight is the importance of what happens at school. We see that open classroom climates is a positive factor, and that opportunity for students actually to really engage at their school, so that they learn that engagement is something that helpful in their life, so that they also do it a bit later. And we found also some variation in terms of in terms of the opportunities that students are offered in their school environment. And of course, that's something that needs to be looked at. Not all young people get to the same extent these opportunities. So I think that's something that we're also individual countries should look at the results and then see, is there something that we can do about it in case this is not a given for everyone in our education system. We also, when we look at digital technologies and internet, we see it's not at least not used so much for active engagement, and but internet source is now much more reported than, for example, newspapers, and also students, almost half of students thought that they would expect participation in online discussions. And so digital technology, even though we found few do it very actively, will be on the agenda also in the future and probably might actually increase. So it's something to be reckoned with. And the results show also that teachers and schools actually incorporate many of these new aspects, so digital technologies, environmental sustainability in their school environment, have initiatives in their teaching, place more importance on that. And however, we also found quite considerable differences, and that's certainly something to consider especially when looking at the data. I should also say this is actually the first look at the data, and we very much hope that these data will be used extensively in the future, so that both in a comparative way, but also as part of looking at each individual participating system and country, and to see to what extent it helps with the improvement to improve civic and citizenship education in each country, which we believe is a very important part of education that should remain very high on the agenda. So, and with that, bedankt. Thank you. And I will pass on now to Dirk Hastert, who will talk about the takeaways of this study, and I'm trying to... Over to you. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Wolfram, for this excellent presentation that you have just given with such a wealth of information from the study and a wealth of results from the study. I think it gives you a very holistic perspective, not only of the study and study results, but also of education systems and the differences we are seeing. So I would like to give you just 3 short takeaways from the results that I'm seeing. Firstly, civic education is becoming an increasingly important topic in education policy across many countries, but also within institutions and schools and among teachers and students and parents. Civic education is important as it fundamentally underpins the ability of citizens to engage productively in society. And it's especially important at a time where we are seeing crises all around the world, including health, financial crisis, or violent conflicts. Civic education relates to what young people are likely to do in the future, from what we're seeing in the study. Do they expect to vote in elections, or do they expect to engage in illegal protest activities? That shows how important civic knowledge is for a student and for the future generation. We also saw that higher levels of civic knowledge tended to be related positively to gender equality, environmental protection activities, and of equal rights for immigrants and ethnic groups in society, which again shows the importance of civic knowledge and civic education in general in all our countries. The second takeaway is that, unfortunately, the results of ICCS 2022 reveal many decreases in civic knowledge across many countries. When looking at the 11 countries that have comparable data across all 3 cycles of ICCS, we see that in between 2016 and 22, there were more decreases in civic knowledge, and in 5 countries, while there were no increase recorded in general. This is very different from what we saw before, where we saw increase, and this has now stalled or even turned lower. Whether and to what extent this development is connected to disruptions in education between 2020 and 22, caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, that's something, as Wolfram also said, we don't know for sure. There are a lot of developments, and there might be also a relationship to the interruptions we see. So it's very important also to look into the future. And one thing I think that also came out very clearly is that it can be very tempting to look at just the rankings, because it's easy to grasp, an easy message to see. But again, also Wolfram showed us that there's huge variation also within all the countries. And the variation within the countries is larger than across countries. So it's very important to emphasize and to look at the deviations that we are seeing within country. And Wolfram many times also said that there's, in terms of results, huge variations how relationships turn out to be within the countries. So it's very, very important to look at this data and have a focus on individual countries. See them in this international perspective, but also see what's the story behind in each of these countries. And I'm happy that we'll today also see some national results here from the Netherlands. And I know that also many other countries will have today their release events and showing also their national perspectives. So my final point and hope following today's event is to make good use of the data that's becoming available from ICCS as the work has just begun. So, as Wolfram said, we just had the first glance at the data, but there's much, much more in the data. All the data will become available publicly, and people are encouraged to work with it. And I'm really looking forward to see many, many, many more results and publications and analysis from the study. The data will be released publicly and open on February 22nd to everyone. Then the data is freely available from the IA website, and we're looking forward to many people making use of it. ICCS provides a unique and comparative data that is recognized as a solid evidence for researchers, educators, and policymakers interested in monitoring educational policy agendas and improving teaching learning practices in this critical area. An important aspect will be followed to monitor these declining trends that we have seen in the future. Is it just a dip that we saw, or is it a continuous trend? This is something we can only see when countries will participate in the upcoming cycle of ICCS 2027. And the registration for this study is already open. So countries are, of course, invited to participate. And I personally hope that many will pick it up, because I think it will be interesting results. Where will it go? Will we see an upwards trend again? Will we see further declines? How about the relations? So I hope that many countries will look at it and will register for that. So thanks for joining this event today, here in person, but also many, many people online. And I'd like to give back the floor to Thierry first. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our two speakers. As you could see, all the richness of the survey, it was said, I mean, it's just the beginning. We have a lot of information here and a lot more to come. So, as Dirk said, we encourage you to dive into the data and to spread out all these fascinating results. And because, as it was shown, it's a unique survey. It's not only about knowledge and international studies on knowledge, but also on engagement, values, and for many countries, and Dirk said it is an increasing topic. It's not only about transmission of knowledge, but it's also about how to prepare future citizens. So that's a really, really unique, as you understood, studies that we have now, and in our different contexts, this topic we know are so important nowadays for education system. So then it makes me a nice transition to our next speaker, and that I will introduce now. I want to speak about Minister Marielle Paul, sorry, Minister for Primary and Secondary Education for the Netherlands. And thank you to be here with us. As a member of the Conservative Liberal People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, Minister Paul was elected to the House of Representatives in 2021, acting as party spokesperson on primary and secondary education, and became Minister for Primary and Secondary Education in July 2023. She also previously worked as a communications director for several multinational corporations. Thank you again, Madame la Ministre. Thank you. Merci.
Merci bien, Monsieur Rocher, and good morning, everybody. Citizenship. It's about the smallest unit in our democracy, the citizen, but it's also about the great mission we all as citizens have to form a society together, because it involves more than just knowing how society works, what rules apply and what values they're based on. It also involves you as a student gaining the tools you need to hold your own in society. That's something you learn at home, but also in the classroom, from debating social issues to knowing where you can find reliable political news online, or devising a plan with your classmates to make your schoolyard a lot greener. You learn what your position in the world is and how you yourself can also help shape that world. And you also learn a lot from your classmates about their position in the world, their worldview, their culture, their background, because a society is something you create together, even in the classroom, which is like a smaller version of society. And that's why it's important to learn at an early stage how to engage in an open conversation about difficult and complex issues. There's nothing wrong with a little healthy debate and a little healthy disagreement, but it's important to learn from each other's differences and embrace the fact that opposing views can actually enrich society. And that's why it's essential to focus attention on citizenship in our schools. And we need to do this correctly, effectively. The lessons need to have the desired effect. And this is why I'm so pleased with this international study and the fact that the Netherlands has been allowed to participate in it again. I would, of course, like to thank all of the researchers here today and elsewhere for all their hard work, because it's obvious that a lot of hard work went into this report and this research. And of course, I would like to thank the IEA for organizing this international study. There are numerous lessons to be learned from this report. It shows that certain things are going well, also in the Netherlands. For example, the group of 14-year-olds surveyed have gained increased trust in the media and in the courts, was also shown in the presentation previously. They also believe firmly in our democracy. However, there's plenty room for improvement still. For example, Dutch youngsters achieve a lower score for knowledge of citizenship than contemporaries in many other countries. They are also performing worse than they did in the 2016 ICCS study, just like students from all over the country surveyed. Ladies and gentlemen, this situation can and must be changed. We need a change for all Dutch school students. And this is why the Dutch government has already taken a variety of measures to reverse this downward trend. Before listing the actions we're taking, I'd first like to look at the larger picture. As a student, you can only learn effectively if you're comfortable in your own skin. And that's not always the case right now, because many students are still suffering from the effects of the COVID period. To ensure that every student is effectively equipped and supported to cope with these effects, we launched the National Education Programme 2 years ago. At the same time, we're also making further improvements to citizenship education, which starts with a solid foundation, ensuring that every school student can read, write, and do math well, that they can safely navigate the digital world and understand the rules of our society. Obviously, citizenship is one of the cornerstones of that solid foundation. We assist schools by sending our educational coordinators to support them, and we've also established the Citizenship Expertise Desk, Expertise.Punt Burgerschap, where teachers, team leaders, and school heads can get tools and background information on citizenship education. And this brings me to my second point. the new Citizenship Act that also took shape in the wake of the last ICCS study. It lays down in law the requirements for adequate citizenship education. It clarifies what's expected of schools when it comes to citizenship education, while leaving them free to structure their lessons themselves. My third point builds further on this. We're currently in the process of developing new core objectives for citizenship, the so-called kerndoelen, making it even clearer what knowledge and skills are expected from students on completion of their schooling. This will also provide guidance for teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to citizenship, we still have a lot to do. I deliberately say we, because we have to do this together. This places demands on schools, but also on the people in this room today, on policymakers and researchers. We have to map out the way forward, as well as make regular checks to ensure we're on the right track, to ensure that the methods we're applying really do work. And in doing so, we need to continuously bear in mind for whom we're actually doing all this. And the answer is simple. We're doing this for all those students in all those classrooms, to prepare them for the future, hopefully for a bright future, so that they can claim their place in society and function effectively and harmoniously with others. Teachers, teaching assistants, and school heads in the Netherlands are working very hard, day in, day out, to help achieve this. I very much appreciate all their efforts. At the same time, this report shows we still have some way to go. We need to push forward and show even more students what exactly citizenship means. Show them what lies hidden behind that word, because that's what every student deserves and needs in order to be prepared for all that society and life in general has to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre. I think it's really important for us, for our association, to see how our studies can inspire, let's say, in some ways, your action as policymakers. And this is very important. Each country can take its own perspective coming out of this result. So thank you for all your perspectives and your witness and about this study that is seeming to be very rich for the case of Netherlands. So thank you very much. All right, now we are going to do a short break of 15 minutes. So you can still ask your question in the Q&A functionalities with the QR code, I remind you. Just after the break, we will hear your question regarding Dirk's and Wolfram presentation first, and then we will know more about the Dutch report and some comparison with other countries, and also a presentation of the outstanding publication Teacher Snippet about the ICCS. So we will still have one very exciting hour ahead, so please stay tuned and come back in 15 minutes. Okay, welcome back to this session on ICCS 2022 results. We are now in another kind of configuration with two more invitees on the table and future speakers. I would like to introduce Remert and Valeria first, and then go to some questions that you asked in the chat. So let me welcome Valeria Damiani, and she's a ICCS 22 consortium member, and she will discuss afterward the possible use and the implication of ICCS 22 for a teacher classroom context, and we'll speak about the teacher snippet. Dr. Valeria Damiani has a PhD in education and is an associate professor at LUMSA University. She worked as a researcher for the second cycle of ICCS 2016 and was a member of the Joint Management Committee for ICCS 2022. Her research interests include civic and citizenship education, global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, and social inclusion. Thank you very much, Valeria, to be with us. We have also Remert with us. Remert Das is an associate professor at the University of Amsterdam. He is involved in various studies into the citizenship competencies of students in primary education, secondary education, and secondary vocational education. He also supervises internships and theses and teaches various courses, in particular about educational policy and citizenship education, at the bachelor's and master levels in educational sciences. So thank you, both of you, to be here. You are for a long time partners and very involved in ICCS, so that's really great to have you on board. I would like to start by some question more on maybe Wolfram and Dirk's presentation, and then maybe to keep some question for you, Remert and Valeria, after your presentation. But first, some clarification about, for example, the recording of this session. So it will be recorded. It will be on the YouTube channel of IEA, so you will find out afterwards. There was also some clarification about some question on, maybe for Wolfram, question about immigrant background students who score lower in the survey, as you've shown. Do we define their civic knowledge and interest in terms of their country of immigration or their home country? That's a clarification question. I think you can speak directly.
In terms of the students with an immigrant background, so we basically base it on information about the country of birth of the parents, guardians, and the students. And so we, of course, do not know whether these are relatively recent immigrants or not. We also define it a bit wider, so if the student is born in the country, but both parents, for example, are from born in another country, we still define that as immigrant background. So, of course, it's a very broad category. And, of course, a lot of factors come in there. We know that in many countries, and we have also to take into account that there's a lot of variation in terms of what immigration means in different countries and different contexts. So this is more of an above on average finding. Mm. And if you look into particular countries, you may actually find there is no difference. Mm. And so we cannot really tell to what extent, for example, their civic knowledge is actually influenced by the country, the education system in the country where we measured it, or maybe it has some influence from before. We wouldn't know that. Okay. That would require a different design for a study like this. Mm-hmm.
Question for the future, maybe. Thank you, Wolfram. Another question on clarification is: did you ask about communication activities? So, did you ask the students about their usage of different social media channels? Or it was like, how deep into details have you been into distinction between different channels in terms of social media?
Well, we asked more general questions. Oh. We didn't ask about whether they use TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook or whatever. No, we did not. One always has to consider that it's something that has to be understood, and the more detailed it becomes, and then you have between country variations, so certain social media might be more frequent in one country among young people than in others. And of course, it can't be that fine-grained. So these are very general questions about for example, liking or posting things, but not specifically on which social media that might have occurred or what kind of online information we're referring to.
Thank you, Wolfram, for the clarification. There is a more, or I don't know if it's more profound question, but on the correlation between civic knowledge and engagement. So how can we explain the association between higher political participation and lower civic knowledge? Does this mean civic knowledge does not necessarily lead to more engagement as assumed? But there was different results. Maybe, Dirk, you want to say a word on that after, and maybe Wolfram can.
Yeah, thank you, Thierry. I think what was shown also in the results is that we have different kind of engagement. We have the willingness to elect in future elections, and that was positively associated with civic knowledge. Then it was being part of a political party, and there we did not see that. So we have to distinguish. There's different focus areas, and some of them might be related, others not. What I also found very profound again is this participation in illegal activities, which was also strongly negatively correlated. So students with higher knowledge tend to be less likely, that's at least from their information, what they say, to be engaged in illegal protest activities. So I think we need to have a very distinct look at that, and it's probably also very interesting to look at that country by country, so that we can see more in depth what's the situation in different countries, since that might be also different.
Yeah, maybe Wolfram, thank you, Dirk, you want to comment on that? Is it sufficient to have civic knowledge to be an engaged participant,
no,
or is it the opposite?
Certainly not sufficient. It helps in certain terms, in certain ways. I would also like to highlight that if you ask them about environment protection activities, actually there is a positive association. So those who know more are also those who are more expecting engagement in that way. And if we think about things that are this conventional active political engagement in political parties or in political campaign, maybe that is also a bit of a reflection about the pitfalls of, or that those who actually know more think also more about the hindrances of getting somewhere with this kind of political engagement in a conventional way. So there's maybe a more bit of the sophistication, which might also be a factor in all of this. And maybe it's saying something about how we sell our conventional participation channels in general. That it's a lot has to do probably also with the images of politicians, of political parties, and also the more you know, the more you're actually also aware of that. And so I think this has to be regarded a little bit also from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wolfram. There was a question about also, could you address the challenges of getting countries outside of Europe to participate in the survey? Maybe it's on you, Dirk, this one.
Yeah, thank you, Thierry. Yeah, indeed, we were not too happy to see that we see dropouts, especially in Latin American region. But of course, you also have to consider that COVID-19 was very extreme there, and also a longer effect. So there might have been some effects like that, but also others. But we certainly hope that countries will come back and that other countries will join too. As we have seen today, this study is so important. So there's another chance for ICCS 2027, and we really hope that more countries see the value of this information also as data that can steer future education in this aspect, can help teachers, can help principals, can help policymakers and researchers to see how we can improve civic education around the world. So I certainly hope that there will be more countries joining in the next cycle, and as I said, registration is up, so countries can start their engagement now and contact us at any time.
Thank you, Dirk, for this call for 2027. I think important to have as many countries as possible. I think now it's time maybe to go to our next speakers and coming back afterwards to some other questions, and then eventually coming back to Wolfram and Dirk for other questions, but for Remert and Valeria. So now the idea is to take a step further into international results and hear from national representatives as Remert is, as I presented. So because we are a lot of countries sharing the national report and disseminating national report in every country. So that's the occasion today with Remert to dive in the report of the Netherlands and to compare also with other countries. So Remert, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Terry. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to everyone watching online. I would like to first take this opportunity to congratulate Wolfram and all of the team on a very hard job. Well done. I think that deserves a lot of recognition. I'm very happy to have been invited to speak to the Dutch results in a very short presentation. And I would like to express my gratitude for that invitation, but also like to mention that I'm part of a team that's been conducting the study in the Netherlands, and I've been very fortunate to have colleagues working very hard the past couple of years on getting a job well done. So I'm very happy to be here standing, but I'm one person out of a very good, I feel, team. Given that I've limited time, I would like to give you and share with you 3 takeaways which I think are relevant to a broader audience when looking at the Dutch results. And the first one, and Wolfram already mentioned this in his presentation, is this is a very large study. And here we have the numbers of the Dutch participation. We saw earlier in Wolfram's presentation the international numbers, which are obviously much, much larger still because of the 24 countries and entities involved. But in the Netherlands, we have participation from 87 school principals, about 1,000 teachers, and just over 2,600 students. And that's a very, very large and very rich study. And just to give you, I would like to give you a bit more feel about what that looks like. This is my colleague Esther, and in the Netherlands, we were one of the third of countries that still participated in the paper-based assessment. And this is not even all of the materials. This is most of it. But I'm very happy that I took this picture. This was when most of the materials got printed just before we were going into schools to administer the study. And we'd build a fort around Esther, which was the ICCS fort. But this is what 2,600 students questionnaire, 1,000 teacher questionnaires looks like. This is a very large study. What we did is we had about 130 schools participating in the study. So we had to get all those materials to schools. So what you see here is when we got them returned from schools, every box is a school, a student questionnaire, a student knowledge test, and a European questionnaire, and the envelopes are the teacher questionnaires. So this is when the materials got returned to us for processing, because obviously we had to make everything digital to arrive at a large data set. So this is when everything came in. And then when we processed them, we'd stack them up against the wall. And this was a pet project of mine. This was the wall of citizenship. And so these are the boxes that were processed. But unfortunately, disaster struck. My wall collapsed. Luckily, these were the materials which were already processed, and you can see the damage is limited because most of the boxes stayed closed. But my pet project didn't survive. We couldn't make a single wall. We had to build multiple. But here you see, so this is what 130 schools and questionnaires and knowledge test looks like. So again, this is a very, very large study and contains a lot of rich data, a lot of rich materials, which I'm very happy to say resulted in today our launch of the Dutch report on, which we call Burgerschap in Beeld, citizenship in the picture, which discusses and reports all the results for the Netherlands in comparison to other countries. My second takeaway is one of the qualities and one of the, I think, unique qualities of this study is that it allows us to compare citizenship competencies of students across countries. So here we have the results on the Dutch knowledge test, the civic knowledge test, which was conducted similarly across countries. And Wolfram already reported the knowledge test allows to distinguish between different levels of comprehension of students. So we have ranging from level A to D, or even below level D, and the percentages of students performing at each proficiency level. So this is informative to us as researchers and as people working in education, that we have some grip on how many students have which level of comprehension. But should we be happy? Should we be sad? What's our reflection of these numbers? And that's where the international comparison comes in, of course, where we can compare the Dutch results to the international average. And there we see striking similarities, which still, this is the international average, which still raises question, is that a good or a bad thing? Because international average, as Wolfram showed, contains 24 countries. So what countries exactly are we comparing ourselves to? So that allowed us to delve further into comparison with countries which we thought would make for a relevant benchmark for Dutch students. So looking at indicators like the United Nations Human Development Index or the Democracy Index, we identified 4 countries or a German state which we felt were a relevant benchmark to get a better interpretation of the Dutch results. So here on the right you can see the bars with the students at different proficiency levels. And so now this allows us for a better interpretation of what strikes us as worthy of attention. So we can see that in the Netherlands, a relatively smaller percentage of students perform at the highest levels compared to these benchmarking countries, whereas at the other end, a relatively larger percentage is 17%, 14% the level below 2 and level D, which is larger than in the other benchmarking countries. So that gives us the picture that, all right, compared to the international average, it seems to be about on par. But looking at countries which we think are in a relatively similar context, students in the Netherlands are outperformed by their peers in other countries. So that raises some concerns as to how our satisfaction with that level of knowledge of Dutch students. So the second takeaway is that particularly the international comparison and the richness of the ICCS data allow us for a lot of more relevant interpretation of our results. The third takeaway is that because we have all this data, we can also delve deep into what we find in the Netherlands in terms of differences between students. Wolfram already reported on the differences in relation to student background, like gender, socioeconomic status, education level of the parents. We've discussed all of those in the report as well. But one of the particular focus in the Dutch report is that in the Netherlands we have an attract system. We have streams, which we can group into vocational streams, general stream, and academic streams. In Dutch, VMBO, HAVO, VWO, of which we know that there's differences between students' performance in those levels. Here we can see on a selection of outcomes. We have civic knowledge, and we have several of the attitudinal scales. The difference between students attending the different streams. And we can see the differences are quite large. especially on civic knowledge, but also on the other scales, we see differences between students attending the different educational streams. What's more, we can see the comparison of those results from 2022 to the earlier 2016 study. And there, again, we see that those differences existed and that they're persistent. We can't compare them for all scales because we don't have data on every measure in both instances. Wolfram mentioned in his presentation, the contents of ICCS is evolving as is the study and as is our ideas about what's relevant to citizenship. So the contents aren't identical to 2016. But looking at the scales for which we can compare to 2016, we can see that the picture is relatively stable. In other words, our challenges in trying to improve citizenship and education in the Netherlands are persistent, and we see a lot of effort from the government. The minister was just stressing how new legislation was introduced. We see a lot of effort from schools, which are struggling with finding the right way and more effective ways to improve student citizenship competencies. But we also see that changes appear to be very slow and the challenges, therefore, are persistent. That's what I like to share. So now I give the floor to Valeria.
Thank you, Remet. And yes, give the clicker to Valeria, please.
Thank you.
So Valeria, the floor is yours to present us the teacher snippet.
So thank you, Thierry, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I will present the teacher snippet that was developed using ICCS 2022 data. And this teacher snippet is focused on education for sustainable development in the classroom and beyond. As with all the other IEA teacher snippet, this snippet aims to provide teachers with good examples that can guide them in their daily practices in the classroom and outside the classroom. For this snippet, we have used data from teachers who teach civic and citizenship education-related subjects, but also data from teachers teaching all the other curricular subjects. Because education for sustainable development is a task, is something that can be developed not only by a limited number of people, but it's the prerogative of all teachers and the school as a whole. And you will see this, of course, in the data we've used. This idea of education for sustainable development is just like the idea of civic and citizenship education as it is developed in the ICCS study. So a subject area that is, of course, of predominance of a group of teachers who are specialized in civic and citizenship education, but it is, on the other hand, a task for all the teachers involved at the school. So we have structured the teacher snippet into 4 sections. Each section highlights the key findings for teachers on education for sustainable development. So the first one is focused on the importance of designing classroom activities that can link the local to the global. With this, helping students to reflect on the impact that their individual lifestyles have on the environment. ICCS data on this show that about 60% of the teachers have carried out in the classrooms activities to raise students' awareness of excessive resource consumption and their consequent environmental impact. The second section is related to the implementation of ESD, Education for Sustainable Development activities, beyond the classroom, in the local community, in cooperation with the external groups and associations. These kind of activities are very relevant because provide students with hands-on opportunities to be engaged in real-life issues related to sustainability. In this regard, ICCS data showed that, again, more than half of teachers, 60% of the teachers, reported that they have carried out activities in the local community related to education for sustainable development with their target grade students, such as water and energy saving or recycling. Another key finding from ICCS that can inform teacher work in the classroom is related to the embedding of education for sustainable development across the curriculum. So in civic and citizenship education, as well as in all the other curricular subjects. As I said before, it is something that needs the whole school to be developed. Education for sustainable development, like civic and citizenship education, they share this transversal nature, this cross-curricular nature. So it is very important to be developed across the whole school. And last but not least, the fourth aspect, the fourth section, is focused on the teaching methodologies and the importance of implementing interactive and student-centered methodologies that can put the student at the center of the teaching and learning process. With this, helping the students to develop their knowledge and skills to, again, be engaged in real-life, hands-on issues on education for sustainable development. In this regard, ICCS data showed that the activities that most of the teachers reported to carry out in their civic and citizenship education classes are related to group discussions with students on current issues, possibility for students to work in small groups, and the analysis of information gathered from different web sources. Of course, these are only the main highlights that can help teachers on their daily practices on education for sustainable development. There is much more on the international report, also for school heads. So I'm thinking, for instance, to the activities that the single schools can carry out at the school level for promoting education for sustainable development. And these kind of activities can be seen in conjunction with what is happening in the classroom and outside the classroom to promote education for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. So a question, maybe, not to avoid it on the gender, because there was a remark that our table is not very balanced in terms of gender, actually. But just to say that for those of you who went to an ICCS meeting and see all the NRCs and so on, it's very mixed and collaborative and very balanced. This is not a representative sample in a way. But there is a question to come back and focus on the result about gender differences, because there is a lot regarding gender and differences in the survey. So there are questions saying that the gender socialization affect civic engagement. So, but are you going to explore more in depth this relationship between engagement, gender, socialization? I don't know, Remert, in your case in the Netherlands, if you have plans on that.
Thank you. I think it's interesting, Wolfram showed in his presentation that of the 24 countries participating, there were 2 where there was no significant difference in civic knowledge between genders. One of those 2 was the Netherlands. There was a gender difference, though be it small, in 2016, but that's disappeared in 2022. So in our case, it's not as big of a factor, it appears, as it is in other countries. But it is something definitely that we look at in the analyses, in the report. Of course, now I'm talking about civic knowledge. There's a lot of attitudinal aspects, which are all part of the report where we do look at those differences. But it appears in the Netherlands, comparative to the other participating countries, those differences are small.
Wolfram, maybe you want to add on that? Thank you, Remert.
Yeah, I think we have seen not only in outcomes of a civic and citizenship education study that gender is a factor. I mean, we, for example, reading studies consistently have shown over the past decades is kind of finding that female students are better at reading, and I think this has to be taken account of the global picture that we have this kind of, on many measures we find these gender differences, and of course something that needs to be looked at, but as Rama just pointed out, this is also something you might want to look at the level of individual education systems. From our perspective, we look at on average, and on average we can say in most countries that's the case, but in terms also when it comes to gender stereotyping and things like that, something that is of course of interest and should looked at more closely, and I think the data we have, as also for other areas, of course, provide a good basis for looking deeper into that.
Thank you, Wolfram. An interesting question I don't know for whom, maybe it's very open because you can, four of you answer. Is how do you explain that the majority of students believe that democracy is the best form of government, but at the same time they think that the elected representatives do not care much about the people's interest? Is it a reflect of a kind of shared opinion in the society? Or, I don't know. How do you explain this, not contradiction, but yes?
Yeah, I've had some thoughts about it. I think democracy is kind of an ideal, and where people usually say, yeah, that's right. I mean, we can maybe leave aside for a moment how democracy is defined, because people define democracy also in different ways, of course, and especially when you ask people about it, what it actually means. Is a democracy just elect someone who then makes all the decisions, or is it something that has certain separation of powers and so forth? But I think it reflects, and you can actually see it if you look at different countries. You see that it's not the same picture everywhere. In some countries, people also are still more satisfied with how things work, but it probably also reflects a bit how generally it is perceived. So in countries and systems where you perceive higher levels of corruption, of nepotism, of what have you, where dysfunction is actually more out there, there you find the gap is probably larger. So if generally people don't trust what's happening, and distrust is unfortunately increasing everywhere, but I think it's very interesting to look also at these differential gaps that you find between the general endorsement of democracy as an ideal of a system, that's how democracy should be governed, and what they actually think about how it currently works, and that's not the same.
Mm-hmm. Good. You wanted to add on that, Dirk? No? Yeah.
Well, just maybe two sentences. One, I think we should see it as very positive that the vast majority of students just think that democracy is the best governmental organization that we can have. So I think this is very positive. But of course, we should be concerned about the dissatisfaction with some how it is actioned. And as Wolfram said, I think especially this one is one where we really need to look country by country and compare these figures. And this is where I think ICCS has a great value, because you can see what's happening and what's going on in your country compared especially to the others. And there we see the big advantage of these international studies.
Yeah. Thank you, Dirk. There's a question about I think the elaboration on the questionnaires and maybe the framework, etc. Maybe to Valeria, as a specialist of the content, is what defines a good citizen is contested or not? I mean, the question is about how do countries meet together and elaborate all these questions, and did you have some issues in discussions, etc., in the elaboration? So maybe for you on the content, maybe Remert can have his point on the Netherlands.
Well, this is one of the, let's say, more traditional questions that we have in the IEA studies on civic education at first and then ICCS afterwards. So the good citizenship behaviors is an area, an issue that we are measuring across cycles with different focus. So we have, of course, worked a lot on the conservative, traditional citizenship behaviors, and then the social movement-related behaviors. And across the different cycles, we have introduced other dimensions that are related to the different focuses that the study had across the cycle. So for this study, we have the global citizenship behavior, and we are looking across the cycle how this construct is evolving, considering the two important and foundational dimensions that we have found in the first IEA studies on civic education.
Interesting. And from the Netherlands perspective, for example, were there some issues in, or at the opposite, maybe missing point, or I don't know?
I wouldn't regard them as issues. I think I've always felt that the approach of the ICCS study has been to take a broad perspective on citizenship. And I think that's reflected in the separate scales that are reporting. So if you'll recall the slide that I just showed, there were 8 scales, civic knowledge being a very prominent one. But there's a broad range of different measures which tap into different aspects of citizenship. And I think very rightly so, there hasn't been reported in any of the ICCS reports a single measure of your citizenship attitudes as a sort of compounded construct. I think very rightly citizenship is constructed of different focal areas, different aspects, and those are reported separately, and that allows us in the Netherlands also to consider which scales we find more relevant in terms of how citizenship is thought of here in policy, but also what we see in practice, and make a relevant selection which we feel best reflects the notion of citizenship in our country.
Good, interesting. Maybe a question about the teacher snippet, because the way that IEA developed this kind of publication, targeting more the teachers. So is it something? It's something that is developed in other studies. As, maybe Dirk can say another word afterwards. But how do you see that, Valeria? How do you see concretely your teachers? But I guess you're working with teachers, so how they can concretely take these results or be inspired by this? How do you see it as the transfer? Because it's very quite difficult topic, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, ICCS, like all international large-scale assessment, provides wide pictures of what is happening in the country and in comparison with other educational systems. I think that the most key relevant findings for teachers and school heads are related to the way, for ICCS of course, the way we have conceptualized civic and citizenship education, and on the aspect we have measured across the educational systems. I'm not referring only to civic knowledge, of course, and attitudes and students' engagement, but especially to learning environments, so to school context and, of course, classroom context that are relevant aspects of teachers and school heads. So a key finding from ICCS is related to the democratic learning environments and how schools and teachers can work together, school principals and teachers can work together in provide students with those democratic environments in which they can develop and deploy their knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be engaged not only in the future, but also in present times, at school, in the local community, while they are studying, you know. So in order to keep them to be, to feel they can improve, their context, the local community, the school they're living in, and they can make a difference.
How does it click for you, Remert, the work with the teachers? Or in the Netherlands, for example, do you work with a network of teachers? Or how these results can be put into the classroom, as Valeria said?
We work together with schools, with school leaders, with teachers, and with students in multiple networks. I think one of the things we're organizing in collaboration with the knowledge network that the minister referred to is that in March there's a dedicated conference on citizenship education and the results of this study for secondary schools. So that's an event which we organize for schools to discuss what this study and what these results mean for them, for their practice, and what they can learn from them. And we have obviously been in touch with schools. What we provided them with is also, for instance, a report which schools have been very interested in, where we position their results in comparison to the other participating schools. So schools received from us a report on their average results, but also in comparison to the other Dutch schools participating, which gave them a sort of benchmark on where do we stand and what are some areas which we excel or which we need improvement. And of course, then we rely on their expertise to gauge what that means for them. So what's a relevant next step for them to take given the outcomes of the study.
And especially because you are going to monitor in the future, because we understood that there were some reform, and then it's also a way to concretely with schools to monitor a bit the reform on civic education in your country.
Absolutely, it's something that's been put into legislation where schools are required to monitor and to work goal-oriented on developing citizenship competencies of students. And I think it's something which I feel for teachers that it's a struggle. This is a hard task, so by no means should we downplay that in any way. That this requires tremendous effort, and we shouldn't be satisfied with reasonable results. This requires continuous improvement and continuous attention. So given the results in the Netherlands, we see that struggle reflected. So there's little improvement in results, or even some outcomes decreasing. But that just requires that means that it requires increased effort on all parts, and especially from teachers, but also all of the other institutions supporting teachers.
Maybe Dirk, one word on this teacher snippets and the objective of this publication.
Yeah. If I may add, all of this study and all of this data collection would not only not be possible without all the researchers, but it wouldn't be possible with all the principals, with the teachers, with the students, and their willingness to let us into the classrooms and to collect the data. So really, really appreciate also the support we are getting from all the schools and all the practitioners. The international report is a lot of statistics, a lot of information that's very relevant and interesting, mostly for researchers. We also try to condense it for policymakers and the public. But in the years, we thought that also the teachers and the schools, they deserve that we give something back to them so that they have something concrete in their hands. And we saw that with the international report, although we all find it fascinating, but it's not really actionable, probably, for schools, for teachers. So we thought we must develop something that's also helpful for the teachers and the schools worldwide. And this is when we started to work on these teacher snippets, and we have them for outcomes from multiple studies. And we have this excellent one also on ICCS that tries to make the results more actionable, more understandable in the classroom context. And that's what we try to also give back to the teachers and principals, as I said, whom we are very grateful that they let us conduct this data collection. So we are very happy about that. So big thanks from me to all principals, all teachers, all the students who made all this research possible.
Thank you, Dirk. I think it's a nice word to finish this discussion. Thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Thank you very much. So we reached to the end. Thank you again for our Dutch colleagues for the organization to welcoming us in this wonderful venue, and of course with the IEA support and IEA staff and communication team. And we are very grateful about all this involvement and all the nice exchanges we just had, and the very interesting presentation in presence of the minister. So it was really a wonderful event. And just stay tuned on the ICCS results. Just look at the report, upcoming secondary analysis, spread the report, spread the analysis. And I think it's worth it, really, as you have seen this morning. So thank you, all of us. And see you soon. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.